meat. And well, I went home and I was looking at my pots and pans and my cookware, and I don't cook meat in the same pot that I cook my vegetables, because I steam vegetables, and I do that in like a Dutch oven.
Right.
And my meat, I if I cook meat, it's usually in like one of those big glass casserole type dishes, and I don't mix them. So
do you ever put dairy in your meat though?
do I ever put dairy?
Like, do you cook in butter or cream or anything?
I cook with cream. I do put cream in chicken soup. I do that.
Yeah.
I don't put butter in meat, I don't think.
Yeah. Yeah. So the pots where you, so technically, if you were to have somebody come over, if you had someone come over who keeps strict kosher and separates their dishes, if you had just cooked vegetables in a pot, then that would be a parve pot. So you could use that for either meat or dairy, and then it would be either meat or dairy going forward. But,
Okay.
that would be a parve pot if you had never used it for anything else.
Okay. Okay. So what about the plates that you eat out of? Can you mix the meat and
The dairy on those?
or no?
Unless they're glass, because the way that you kosher glass is you just wash it.
Okay.
But for us, so if you go to our house, we have our purple plates are our dairy plates, and our teal plates are our meat plates.
Okay. Okay. And the dairy, you can put veggies on that, anything except meat.
Right. And then the meat, you can put veggies on that too.
Okay.
We also have some things that are parve, which means you can use them for either dairy or meat. So what's an example? So measuring cups. Normally I don't put meat products in measuring cups, or I don't often put dairy in measuring cups. So some houses will designate these are the parve measuring cups. My coffee maker is parve because I don't tend to put meat or dairy in my coffee maker.
Okay.
If I had an espresso machine and boiled milk, that would be different.
Okay. Okay.
Great. Anything come up for you, Sephora?
Well, I found myself turning down bacon and also shrimp one time. I had accidental shrimp last night because I didn't think about it when I was ordering, and I got like the chicken shrimp fried rice, and I was like, oh yeah, okay. And so I guess that was a mistake, but it was, I had ordered like this favorite dish I get that has fish, and it's got like a spinach cream sauce, and it has grilled shrimp on top with broccoli. I love it. It's like when I'm wanting, and it's got mashed potatoes.
Where's that?
What? Oh, it's at Logan Steakhouse. So we hadn't had power for 2 days, and I wanted like home cooking feel, but so I went there and I ordered it because I'm like, I'm hungry, you know what I want, and then I couldn't bring myself to put the shrimp in my mouth. Like I don't know, it was weird. Like I was like, I'll vomit if I eat that shrimp. And it was an interesting thing that I was just aware of. And I was like, okay. And I just brought it home for someone else to eat. But
oh no, did you end up eating dinner though?
Yeah, I took shrimp and put it in a little box, I ate everything else. But yeah, I've been a lot more mindful about things I order. Like I probably eat too much cheese anyway. I don't know if I can live without cheese, but I noticed that it feels better to not put it with meats, like, I don't know. It also just seems like it feels cleaner. It feels like a cleaner energy. And also I noticed myself categorizing what I was eating in the little categories that you were saying.
Huh.
It's something that I like that because it's just added to my mindfulness.
Yeah. It's that, like you're saying, that's the main goal, right? Is to be mindful of what it is that we're eating, what we're putting in our bodies. Everybody has a different reason for doing it. Great. You may or may not know this, but I am not the best at history. So I'm going to read a little bit from, I'm going to read a little bit of, you good?
I'm sorry.
I'll read a bit of what someone else has written, but I'll follow along in the timeline, and I will know the answers to if you have questions about what's going on. Let me see if, right. So today we're going to be learning about Talmud. I know that we've had questions before of where is this in Torah, right? And the answer has often been, it's not. Like lighting Shabbat candles. There's nowhere in Torah that talks about lighting Shabbat candles. Writing, let's see, celebrating the end of Shabbat with the Havdalah ritual, not in Torah at all, right? Communal prayer, not in Torah, right? So there are certain things that we see ourselves as obligated to do, but they're not from Torah. So where are they from? We're going to learn about that today. Big thing to keep in mind is that people will think, oh, the Jews follow the Torah and nothing else. But realistically, we are rabbinic Jews. Without the Talmud, Judaism would look a lot different. Without the Talmud, we might still be sacrificing, right? Or we might be doing nothing for prayer because there's nothing written about what do you do when there's no temple, right? So we're going to learn a little bit about the development of Talmud and what it is. So at the very end of Tanakh, or I shouldn't say the very end of Tanakh because it's not so chronological. Do either of you remember what happens at the very end of Kings, of the books of Kings?
I'd have to have my Bible to.
That's okay. So at the very end of the book of Kings, the Babylonians conquer Judah, which is the southern part of the southern kingdom. Northern kingdom is gone. Nebuchadnezzar conquers that southern empire and kicks out the Jews. But very, very soon after that, the Persians under Cyrus II conquer Babylon in 538 BCE, and they permit the Jews to return to the land of Israel and to rebuild the temple. The second temple is dedicated in 515 BCE. So if you're reading the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, or Ezra and Nehemiah, those are all about rebuilding the temple for that second time. So Alexander the Great then conquers the land of Israel from the Persians in 333 BCE. He dies 10 years later, and then the Hellenistic world is split between two power bases, one in Egypt, which is the Ptolemies, and one in Syria, which is the Seleucids. The Seleucids are the ones who are going to be in charge. So these are the Seleucid Greeks. Greek rule is mostly benign until Antiochus IV forbids the practice of Judaism, leading to the Maccabean uprising. This is the story commemorated in the holiday of Hanukkah. So Maccabean uprising is right here. So at that point in time, it's a battle that we're always going to be dealing with. If you read the book of Maccabees, which isn't officially part of the Jewish canon, is officially part of the Catholic canon. So it's Apocrypha. It's not really part of the canon, but the stories are still seen as important. We have, in the book of Maccabees, it describes how the Hellenistic or the Seleucid Greeks are coming in and and they take over the temple, put idols everywhere, and honestly, most of the Jews are okay with it. They say,
Wow.
okay, we'll sacrifice idols, no problem. But there's a group of zealots, the Maccabees, and they lead a revolt against the Syrian Greeks. They win against all odds, and they are the ones who are kind of sort of leading Israel for a while, but turns out that they end up being corrupt too. As I'm reading from a study guide that I got from the Miller Intro to Judaism program, which is what this textbook is. I love this way of describing it. The Maccabees win independence for the first time since 586 BCE. Remember, we're in 166 to 160 now. But while they were good warriors, they are awful politicians. After several generations of corrupt leadership and internal strife, the Romans are invited in to keep the peace in 63 BCE. This is the end of Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel for the next 2,000 years. In 66, the Jews revolt against the Romans, and within 4 years, in 66 of the Common Era, that's here, the Jews revolt against the Romans, and within 4 years, the temple is destroyed. That's in 70 of the Common Era. The final chapter of this rebellion, known as the Great Revolt, was the fall of the mountain fortress of Masada, which you can still visit today, in 73 of the Common Era. Revolts break out again in 132 of the Common Era under the leadership of a messianic figure named Bar Kokhba. Messianic figure meaning that a whole big group of Jews thought that this was the Messiah, that he was going to restart the kingship, the Israelite kingship. But even more Jews are killed, and Jerusalem was converted into a pagan city in which Jews were forbidden to live. So the big issue now is we've got this Torah that has commanded us to do all of this stuff that we can no longer do because A, we don't live in Jerusalem, and B, the temple's completely destroyed. So the big question is, what do we do going forward? Now, this question didn't just arise with the destruction of the temple. It had started long before that, so in 140 BCE. And in the Mishnah, we get a little bit of this background, or we get this intimated a little bit. The priestly class, not even in the just in the Mishnah, but in the Book of Prophets as well, the priestly class had some corruption within it. And so there were already groups that were breaking off because of their discomfort with the priestly class. So the rabbis kind of were the group that were starting to, who we called the rabbis today, or the Pharisees, were starting to establish synagogues in places other than Jerusalem. And we're starting to establish objects and an order of prayer associated with ways to practice Judaism at home and in your local community. So those are the Pharisees. The Sadducees were those who were the wealthy aristocrats who wanted the temple worship to stay the same. And the Essenes are a group of ascetic. That's interesting. Joseph Telushkin details them as a group of ascetic and disciplined group of ancient hippies. But they rejected the temple. They rejected Jerusalem, right? They're all corrupt. They're not religious enough. So they went they retired to the desert. The problem with the Essenes is that they one of their big values was celibacy, and you can't really last for very long if one of your big values is celibacy. So they die off pretty quickly. And then around the same period of time, right around the turn of or at the turn of the Common Era, we have the life of Jesus, and then you have Jesus' followers who start Christianity. That's the beginning of Christianity. So all of these groups are in response to, number one, the corruption of the priests, and number two, the political turmoil, knowing that we are not in charge of our own city anymore. So after 70 CE, the Pharisees are starting to refer to themselves as rabbis or teachers, and they take it upon themselves to update and expand the laws of the Torah for a new changed world without the temple. A couple of texts are seen as kind of our central texts. So we have Mishnah, which is written which is compiled between 0 and 100 of the Common Era. And these are the first generation of rabbis who are writing this code of law of what do we do in this post-temple world, or this soon-to-be temple world. And then from in 200 or around 200, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, or Judah the Prince, compiles all of these things that have been bounced around into the code of law known as the Mishnah. And then between 200 and 500, there's a lot of commentary happens on the Mishnah, and that's called the Talmud. So the Talmud is commentary on the Mishnah, and the Mishnah, while it quotes Torah, is not so much commentary on the Torah.
So the Talmud is commentary
on the Mishnah. So I'll show you a little bit.
Okay.
So in some ways, these texts expand the law. So for example, Shabbat in the Bible is don't do X, Y, and Z, right? Stay home, don't do X, Y, and Z. But it doesn't really say what we're not supposed to do. We know that that one person gets killed for gathering sticks. So what the rabbis of the Mishnah do is they, from little intimations throughout Torah, they compile that list of 39 things that we're not supposed to do on Shabbat, that list of 39 that we learned before, right? They put together, because Sukkot is said to be the booths, they put together specific laws for how are these booths supposed to be built. And we're supposed to shake all these species. Well, what are the species supposed to look like? How long are they supposed to be, et cetera, et cetera. So they put specific rulings on these things. And for things like prayer, or things like animal sacrifice that you can't do without a temple, they replace that with rituals like prayer. And they put together a very specific prayer service having to do with that. Some of these things are things that had developed in Jewish communities for hundreds of years, just hadn't been codified. And some of these things were things that the rabbis really wrote down and developed and created themselves. In other ways, so sometimes they expanded the law, in other ways they limited the law. So for example, there's a lot of stoning that happens in Torah, right? For, let's say, for carrying around a bunch of sticks on Shabbat, or as we're going to read about, for your stubborn and rebellious son. And so the rabbis of the Talmud come up with ways to limit that as well. So the written Torah, when we talk about written Torah, we're talking about Tanakh, that scripture itself. When we're talking about oral Torah, we're talking about Mishnah and Gemara, which is Talmud. So Talmud is Mishnah plus Gemara. Mishnah is a code of law. It's written between 0 and 200, or it's compiled in 200, but the contents are rabbinic thought from about 0 to 200. After Yehuda Hanasi puts together the Mishnah, then the Gemara is commentary on the Mishnah. And that's commentary on the Mishnah from 200 to 600-ish. And it's kind of layers and layers of thought and conversation. I'll show you on the next page a little bit more how it works, but the way the format of the Gemara, in fact, I'll go there now. So this is from the first page of Gemara. There are, I believe, there are 60 some books of Gemara. And they all sprout out of books, they're parallel books of Mishnah. There are two versions of the Talmud. One is the Jerusalem Talmud, one is the Babylonian Talmud, just kind of the group of rabbis who put all of these sayings together. The one that we tend to use is the Babylonian Talmud. So the format is, you've got the Mishnah quoted, and I'll try to find where that ends. So in this middle column here, you've got the Mishnah quoted. And then after the Mishnah, you've got some commentary on the Mishnah. That's the Gemara. So it might comment on why the Mishnah uses a certain word. It might comment on, well, if I'm supposed to build a wall, how high is that wall? And it's not just one person's commentary, but it's a series of rabbis. So Rabbi so-and-so said the wall is supposed to be 8 meters, and I'm going to take in a verse from Torah to explain to you why. Rabbi so-and-so says, no, that's not true. It's supposed to be 10 meters, and here's another verse from Torah to tell you why. And then it might say, no, both of them are right. In this situation, it's 8 meters. In this situation, it's 10 meters. And so you've got the rabbis kind of arguing with each other. But what's really fun about it, I think, is that these are generations of rabbis. So the text that we're using, the text that's our base text, is written from 0 to 200. But between 200 and 600, that's a lot of generations. And so the texts that they use as proof texts for one another come from 600 years of rabbis talking plus scripture. And they'll quote anywhere in Tanakh. They might quote from Proverbs. They might quote from Job. They might quote from Genesis. So these are really, really learned people who are pitting all these texts against each other. With some things in Gemara, there's a clear cut, this is the right answer. And then with some things in Gemara, the rabbis kind of throw their arms up and say, all right, I don't know. Right? I don't know. And so the Gemara is not the last word on what Jewish law is. So if we expand here, this middle section is Gemara. What's fascinating but really frustrating about reading Gemara is that there is no punctuation or vowels. No vowels, no punctuation. But you can now buy, they now print ones that do have vowels and punctuation, which is helpful. Right on the side here, where you see these tiny texts, this tiny like different font here, that's telling you where in Torah it's quoting from. So this little section of Gemara is asking, when do you say this particular prayer? And in that prayer, it says, you should love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with everything else. You should do this when you lie down and when you rise up. And so it's quoting from that place in Deuteronomy, when you lie down and when you rise up, right before you go to bed and when you wake up in the morning. That's where we say this prayer. And then they're quoting from Genesis. Well, what's more important, the morning one or the evening one? Because look, Vayhi Erev, Vayhi Boker, and there was evening and then there was morning. So the evening one's more important. Right? These are the kinds of discussions that they're having. They're really grappling with what is Jewish law. We'll also see that there are stories in Talmud as well. Right? So it's not just all about law, but there are some stories about learning from these rabbis. So back to format, the middle part is the Gemara. Then on the middle of, if you're going to flip the book out, on the middle of the book is like on the middle column. So like on the right column if you're on the left page, and on the left column if you're on the right page, is the commentary of Rashi, who's kind of seen as a central commentator. His text is always written in special font, which is another annoying thing because also no punctuation, but different font that you have to learn. That looks very different it's like cursive or print, sort of. So this is the commentary of Rashi. He's seen as our central commentator. His grandchildren, the Tosafot, also have a commentary, so they're typically on the other side. And then in the columns, it depends what, in the far column, it also depends what version of Talmud, what printing of Talmud you're reading. But it'll either have some other rabbis' commentaries, or most often it'll have some quotes or some places, it'll have citations of, well, where do I find the law for this? Because Gemara or Talmud doesn't really give you clear-cut laws. It's a conversation. And sometimes it's clear who wins the conversation, and sometimes it's not clear who wins the conversation. So what you have on the corner is citations of some later laws that will say what has developed in Judaism as this is the law. And we'll learn about these codes of laws in a couple of weeks, but the two major ones are written in the 1100s and in the 1100s and in the, I believe, 1400s. And law has developed since then because technology has developed since then, and we need different wording for different laws. But when you find these citations, it'll give you specifically what is ruled in Judaism. What's the rule? Who wins out in this argument? Questions about this complicated page of text? Okay, back to this page. So halacha is Jewish law, and Agadah is storytelling. So Talmud or Gemara is a combination of the two, is a combination of laws and storytelling, legal discussion and storytelling.
Okay, say that again.
So halacha is the law, Agadah is storytelling,
Right.
and Talmud really has both in it.
Okay, so that's what.
So up here it would be Mishnah plus Gemara equals Talmud. So Mishnah is 0 to 200. Gemara is 100 to 600.
Okay.
And why is this so important? Why does this develop into law? We see rabbinic Jews, which is who we are now, see this whole text, this Talmud, as having been revealed at Mount Sinai with Torah. So it's almost as important as Torah, but not quite. It was revealed by God. So this is seen as divine text. even though we recognize it's written down by human beings. All right. We are going to read a really fun, I think all of this is fun. A really fun bit of Gemara that's dealing with one of our most frustrating bits of Torah. It's a law that we really, I would hope we really don't want to keep anymore. We are the people of the book. We follow Torah, but what happens when you come up with a law like this? So Joyce, can you read this section from Deuteronomy?
Okay, right here.
And you don't have to read the Hebrew.
If a man has a stubborn, rebellious son who does not obey his father and mother, will not listen to them when they discipline him, his father and mother shall take hold of him and bring him to the elders at the gate of his town. They shall say to the elders, "This son of ours is wayward and defiant. He will not obey us. He is a glutton and a drunkard." Then all the men of his town shall stone him to death. You must purge the evil from among you. All Israel will hear and be afraid.
Great. So what are you supposed to do when your son is acting out?
I don't know, stone him to death.
Stone him to death. Okay. Case closed. Great. Now we will have no more children ever.
Right.
They'll all be dead by the time they're 18.
That's what we need to do with all this crime around here. Instead of putting them in jail, just stone them.
Just stone them to death.
Yeah.
Lovely. Lovely.
Then we won't have any more crime.
Yeah. Then we won't have any more teenagers.
Right.
So the rabbis are looking at this text, and even in the year 0 or 0 to 200, this is already seen as a very ancient way of dealing with crime, or not even crime, a very ancient way of dealing with disobedience. So what they're going to do is they're going to zoom in on this text, and they're going to figure out, how do we kind of argue this text out of existence? Before we read the text, I want us to keep in mind that this is kind of an anti-authoritarian text. Not all text in Talmud is anti-authoritarian. A lot of texts in Talmud will make the law more strict than it already is. So keeping kosher, for example, right? The law might say, or the Torah might say, don't eat a kid in its mother's milk, and that turns into no meat dairy at all, and chicken counts as meat, even if chicken doesn't have milk, right? And separate your dishes, right? That all comes from Talmud. But here, we're doing the opposite. All right. Before we go on to the Mishnah, I want us to construct our own Mishnah. So if we were to try to argue, or if we were to try to look into this text and figure out a way that it doesn't say stone your stubborn and rebellious son to death, what might we do?
So what is your question? What would we do if?
The question is, what might we do to, actually, I'll change the question. What does the situation have to be for this child to be stoned? Looking at all the details in the text, I'll give you one. One is that it's a son, right? So we know that this kid has to be male because it's a son. What are other details that we know about this kid or about this situation?
He's wayward and defiant, a glutton and a drunkard.
Glutton and a drunkard, right? So he has to, the issue here has to be that he's eating and drinking a lot, right? It can't be that he's just arguing with his parents about wanting to go to the movie theater, right? It's he's he's sinning by, or he's being disobedient by being a glutton and a drunkard, and he's doing it in a way where he's not obeying his parents. So his parents told him something having to do with food and drink, and he said no and ate a bunch and drank a bunch. Right? So that gets rid of a lot of rebellious kids, right? We've gotten rid of girls. We've gotten rid of any sort of disobedience that has anything to do with anything other than food or drink. So we're going to, that's just a couple of examples, but we're going to see what the rabbis do with this. So Sephora, can you read the first bit of the Mishnah?
The stubborn and rebellious son, when does he enter into the category of stubborn and rebellious? When 2 hairs appear on his beard until the time it fills in. This is speaking of the lower beard, but the sages use euphemistic language. It is often
Okay, so pause. When we're talking about lower beard, we're not talking about face. We're talking about below. And kind of the logic behind this is that they're not seen as an adult because they're not seen as an adult because it's going to say this. Never mind. Sephora, keep going.
as it is written, when a man has a son, therefore we learn a son and not a daughter, a son and not yet a man. A minor is totally exempt since he does not yet have any liabilities.
Right. So this is a kid who is not yet a minor and not yet an adult. And there's a period of time for this in Judaism, but it's really, really tiny. It's like a few months long. So this kid has to specifically be in these few months because we can't consider him responsible if he's a minor, but also he's his own person once he's an adult. So has to be within this tiny period of time. Can you keep going, Sephora?
At what point is he considered liable? From when he eats a tartamar of meat and drinks a half log of wine. Rabbi Yossi says it must be a maneh of meat and a full log of wine. If he eats it at a gathering for a mitzvah or for a new moon meal, or as part of his tithes in Jerusalem, or he eats non-kosher foods or foods that were improperly tithed, or eats anything that is a mitzvah to eat, or anything that is a sin to eat, none of this counts.
So if it has anything to do with a mitzvah or a wrongdoing, if you're at a party, right, any of that, that shouldn't count. Right? And it has to be a specific amount of meat because remember, he's a glutton. And it has to be a specific amount of wine because remember, he's a drunkard. But you can't be considered a glutton or a drunkard if you're eating at a big meal because everybody's a glutton and a drunkard at certain holiday dinners. So that's out of the question. So that narrows the scope a little bit further. If he eats any food other than meat or drinks any beverage other than wine, he isn't liable. This is based on that verse. He's a glutton and a drunkard. And there is a scriptural hint that these words refer to meat and wine, which comes from the book of Proverbs. Do not be among the wine drinkers or the gluttonous meat eaters. So what the rabbis are doing is they're bringing in a verse that uses the same words and using that to define what those words mean. Joyce, can you read 3 and 4?
If he steals money from his father and eats the food in his father's house, he is exempt. If he steals the money from others and eats with others, he is exempt. If he steals from others and eats in his father's house, he is exempt. It is only when he steals from his father and eats with others that he might be liable. Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda says he must steal from both his mother and his father to be liable.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right. So because the text had said, right, does not obey his father and mother. So it can't be just his father and it can't be just his mother. All right, keep
Okay.
going.
If his father denounces him, but his mother disagrees, he is not liable. If his mother denounces him, but his father disagrees, he is not liable. They have to agree together.
Okay, because his father and mother take hold of him and bring him. Okay.
Rabbi, did I say that right? Yehuda says if his mother isn't fitting for his father, then he is not liable. If one of the parents is blind or deaf or mute or in any way at all disabled, he is not liable.
Because if you look back, he does not obey his father and mother and will not listen to them. He has to be listening to somebody who's talking, so he can't be mute. They have to be able to bring him to the elders at the gate of the town, so they have to have their faculties to physically bring him. Right. That's where all that comes from.
They must first bring him to a court of 3, where he will be punished. Then he has to do the sin again. And this time he must be judged by a court of 23, including the original 3 judges. If at any point he runs away and doesn't return until he is legally a man, he is exempt. However, if he was judged guilty and then runs away before he can be executed, he is still executed on his return.
And that kind of has to do with other Jewish legal laws. Right. Before we go on to the Gemara, what is the Mishnah doing here? What's the process that they're using to create, or really to break down the law?
What is the process?
How are they doing it? What are they doing?
I'm not sure what you're looking for.
I'm trying to think of the word. I can't think of the word.
Yeah.
Would you like to share it with us?
Sure. Yeah. So they're pitting the Torah against itself. They're looking into the Torah text and they're looking at all the details and they're saying, well, it says this. And so we got to be really, really, really specific about it, right? That his father and mother have to be able to talk for him to listen to them. His father and mother have to be able to take hold of him. So they have to have their faculties. They have to be a son, which means they have to be a kid, but we know that minors aren't liable from elsewhere. So they're taking together all these different texts. They're taking together the Torah text. They're looking at the details of the Torah text. They're looking at what they know elsewhere from Jewish law. And they're looking at elsewhere in Tanakh, because they brought in that verse from Proverbs. Okay. So they're pitting a bunch of texts against each other to come up with the conclusion. The big question is, at this point, do you think there are is there any possibility that there's going to be one of these stubborn and rebellious sons? Now that they've narrowed it?
I don't think so.
Yeah, they've made it basically impossible. And they keep doing that with this bit of Gemara at the top, but this is the big part, right? There's a teaching. There never was and never will be a true Ben Sorer Moreh, a true stubborn and rebellious son. We've got all of these different guidelines for this son. There's no way that this kid could ever exist. So why then is it written at all? It must be simply so that you can study it and in so doing gain reward. Because for the rabbis, this Torah is God's word. So it can't be a pointless verse. It can't be pointless that we have this story about this law about the stubborn and rebellious son. So for the rabbis, the reason why we have this story is just so that we can learn from it. God's giving us a teaching. God's giving us an opportunity to study
Okay.
and to get into a healthy argument. Yeah. So whose opinion does this teaching follow? It might be Rabbi Yehuda, who requires that the parents look and speak similarly, which is basically impossible. It also might be Rabbi Shimon, who taught this. Just because a boy ate and meat and drank wine, his parents will never take him out to be stoned. So we've got the Rabbi Yehuda, who is reading the text to say that the parents need to look and speak similarly, which makes it impossible. And we've got Rabbi Shimon, who's looking at the practical side of things. Just because a kid got drunk once, does that really mean that we're going to kill him? Right? What parents would do that? But then, and this is one of those situations we don't know the right answer, Rabbi Yonatan said, I once saw a stubborn and rebellious son, and I even sat on his grave. So for Rabbi Yonatan, he's saying, no, that law is there, has to be there for a reason. It has to be a real law. Even if it's got all of these guidelines, these strict guidelines, and it's a very narrow situation, it's possible because God wouldn't have given a law God wouldn't have given a law that we can't bring forward. So this is the classic example of the evolution of Torah to Mishnah to Gemara, right? That you have, it's layers upon layers upon layers of conversation. Right? Questions about what in the world is going on here?
I get it.
You get it? So how does it make you feel then to know that the rabbis are uncomfortable with something written in scripture?
I think we all are uncomfortable with some of the scriptures. So I don't find that all that different.
Yeah, it's very human. Judaism is a very embodied human tradition. I want to jump forward because I know that Joyce has to leave in a few minutes. And see if we can view this in 2 pages. This is a bit of Mishnah. So like I said, there's the law and there's the law and there's the storytelling, but it's not really easily categorized like this. There is a book of Mishnah called Pirkei Avot, the wisdom of the ancestors or the wisdom of the fathers. And it's a whole bunch of life advice. And these aren't seen as, strict laws in the same way that other things might be. But it's a collection of life advice. And it's maybe the most popular bit of Talmud that we see. So I'm going to invite us just for a couple of minutes to read through these quotes and find one to take forward with you as we go through our day. So Sephora, do you have one of these that speaks to you today?
Yeah, quite a number of them.
Is there one in particular that you can work with you in some concrete way? Oops, I'll go get that.
No,
Oh, you got it? Okay.
Trying to find the one that resonates the most.
Mm-hmm.
I think that this one who is wise, one who learns from everyone, who is rich, one who is satisfied with their lot, who is mighty, one who conquers themselves. I feel like that resonates with me the strongest. A lot of them resonate with me in their.
So how much you act on Benzoma's saying?
I would say all three of the points that he makes are things I need to be more mindful of. I feel like there was a time in my life where I embodied that more than I have recently.
Mhm.
But I also resonate with conquering myself, because I feel like that's what I've been doing, or working towards, or self-mastery, I guess. Yeah, so
How about you, Joyce? Is there one of these that
well,
You can hear it.
actually, I don't know which one but the very last one,
Mhm,
I really liked that. And I like the first one too.
mhm.
So,
So is there something concrete you can do with either the last or the first one?
well, I like make for yourself a teacher,
Mhm.
you know. I really like that. And acquire for yourself a friend, yes. When you judge others, it's so easy. And I try really hard not to judge anyone. But sometimes we do it and don't even realize we're doing it. But I like what that says, tip the balance in their favor.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
sorry.
And for me, that one also is the one that sticks out to me. I think with the middle bit, right? With the acquire yourself for yourself a friend. I know that that most of my close friends live elsewhere, and so I find that sometimes when I don't know what to do, or when I don't know what to do, while yes, I have Fievel, I have my husband. Sometimes it's lonely when I don't have, a close friend who lives nearby. So that's an intention that I'm trying to set when I move, is to really reach out, and to try to get and try to make local friends, try to find people that I can reach out to when I need some assistance, or when I need somebody to talk to. So for me, that's the big intention. It's a great text to look back on. We might learn a little bit more Talmud next week, but I think next week also we're going to learn about the high holy days, which are our days of repentance, or our days of awe. So thank you for learning with me. We'll at noon, we'll meet again next week, normal time, and then we'll change to our other time after that.
okay, sounds good. Thank you so much for your time.